I'll never forget that moment for as long as I live. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my semester. A break from college. A chance to come home, eat a real meal, and sleep in the bed I grew up in. After all those stressful weeks of cramming for exams, pulling all-nighters, and surviving on instant noodles, the only thing I could think about was stepping back into my home and feeling safe again. Home, for me, was supposed to mean comfort, warmth, belonging. But what I saw when I pulled into the driveway ripped all of that away in an instant. At first, I thought maybe I was at the wrong house. I parked my car, stared at the front porch, and blinked a few times, hoping my eyes were just playing tricks on me. But no, it was real. Right there, sitting on the porch where I used to leave my backpacks after school, were several giant black trash bags. They weren't just random garbage bags either. No, they were my garbage bags. And inside them, my stuff. I could see it through. The thin plastic. The sleeve of one of my favorite hoodies. The corner of a textbook I had paid way too much money for. The fuzzy blanket my grandmother gave me when I was 10. Tossed in there carelessly, like they were nothing more than junk. My stomach dropped so fast, it felt like I had been punched. I sat in the car for a moment, frozen. My first thought was, this has to be a mistake. Maybe they were cleaning. Maybe they put some of my things out temporarily. Maybe there was some kind of logical explanation. But deep down, my gut told me the truth. This wasn't an accident. I slowly stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my shoes louder than it should have been. Every step toward those bags felt heavier than the last. I crouched down, untied one, and pulled it open just to make sure I wasn't overreacting. And that's when I saw even more. My sneakers, my favorite jeans, even my old photo albums. That's when it hit me. They weren't just putting my stuff out here. They were putting me out here. The house I grew up in. The house where I had birthday parties. Where I decorated the Christmas tree. Where I laughed, cried, and made countless memories. Suddenly felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. I glanced up at the door, half expecting someone to come out and explain. My mum, maybe, with that tired smile of hers, saying, "Oh, honey, don't worry. We're just reorganizing. Bring your stuff back in." Or maybe my dad, shaking his head and laughing at how dramatic I was being. But the door stayed shut. The windows were dark. And in that silence, my mind started racing with questions. What did I do wrong? Why would they do this? Did something happen while I was gone? Was this their way of telling me I wasn't welcome anymore? I felt this strange mix of emotions bubbling up inside me. Shock, embarrassment, fear, and this overwhelming sense of betrayal. Imagine going home after months of hard work, only to find out you don't even have a home to return to. That's exactly how I felt standing there, on that porch. It's funny. When you're away at college, you always picture home as the one thing that doesn't change. You think, no matter how stressful life gets, I'll always have that place, waiting for me. But in that moment, looking at those trash bags, I realized that wasn't true. Not for me. The worst part, the neighbors saw me. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye and turned my head just enough to notice curtains shifting in the house across the street. Someone was watching me. My face burned with embarrassment. To them, it probably looked like I had been kicked out, like I was some unwanted guest at my own house. And honestly, maybe they were right. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to knock on that door until someone opened it. But my throat was dry, my hands were shaking, and I couldn't even process what to do next. So I just stood there, staring at those bags, feeling smaller and smaller with every second. For a moment, I thought about just dragging them back inside, forcing the door open, and pretending like nothing had happened. But something deep inside me knew that if my things were out here, on display, in plain sight for the whole neighborhood to see, it was intentional. Someone wanted me to find them like this. Someone wanted me to know that things had changed, and that realization was even more painful than the sight of my belongings in trash bags. Because it wasn't just my stuff that had been thrown out, it was me. With shaky hands, I climbed the porch steps, hoping that opening the front door would prove me wrong, that all of this was just a big misunderstanding. The doorknob felt cold against my palm, but I twisted it anyway, expecting it to swing open like it had every other time in my life. But instead, click. Locked. I froze, staring at the knob like maybe I hadn't turned it right. I jiggled it again. Click. Still locked. My heart started beating faster. This was my home. I had never once in my life been locked out of it. Even when I was late, even when my parents were upset with me, I could always come inside. But now, that simple barrier of a locked door felt like a wall between me and everything I thought I could rely on. I pressed the doorbell. The familiar ding-dong echoed faintly inside. Usually I'd hear footsteps after that, my mum's slippers on the floor, or my dad's heavy boots, sometimes even the barking of our old dog, racing to see who had come in. But this time, nothing, just silence. I knocked, soft at first, then louder. "Mom, Dad, it's me. I'm home." Still no answer. That silence stretched on, and every second felt heavier, like the house itself was rejecting me. I banged on the door harder, my fists thudding against the wood. "Come on, let me in. I'm back from school." My voice cracked, desperation leaking out without my permission. Nothing. I stepped back and stared at the windows. The blinds were drawn, but I could sense someone inside. I don't know why. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, but I swear I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching me. And then it hit me, the neighbors. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the curtains across the street shift again. Someone was peeking. I turned my head slightly and saw the faint glow of a television through their living room, but their gaze was fixed on me instead of their show. Another neighbor, 2 houses down, was standing by their mailbox, pretending to check letters that clearly weren't there. My entire body flushed with embarrassment. I felt like a scene in some neighborhood drama, except I wasn't an actor. I was the spectacle, the kid who came home from college, only to find themselves locked out, bags of belongings dumped outside for the world to see, and the worst part, no one came to ask if I was okay. They just watched, silently, like it was free entertainment. I turned back to the door, pressing my forehead against the cool wood, whispering to myself, "This doesn't make sense. This can't be happening." But deep down, I knew it was. The house that once held every good memory of my childhood, birthday cakes, Christmas mornings, movie nights, suddenly felt like a fortress keeping me out. I couldn't believe how quickly it shifted from being my safe haven to feeling like a prison. And the cruelest part was knowing that the keys I once carried, the access I once had been taken from me without a word. I thought about trying the back door. Maybe that one was open. Maybe my parents didn't realize I'd be home today, and this was all just some weird misunderstanding. But when I walked around to the back, my heart sank again. That door was locked too. Every entry point, sealed. I shouted again, louder this time. "Mom! Dad! Please, open up!" My voice echoed into the empty yard. Still, nothing. It was the kind of silence that wasn't just quiet. It was intentional, and in that silence, my mind spun out of control. Were they inside, listening to me pound on the door and just choosing to ignore me? Were they really that serious about cutting me off? The thought burned like fire in my chest. The weight of humiliation pressed down on me harder than ever. Imagine standing outside your own home, screaming for your family to let you in, while the people who once raised you, who promised to love you unconditionally, refuse to answer. And worse, knowing the entire neighborhood might be watching. I could feel tears stinging the corners of my eyes, but I clenched my jaw and refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of strangers, hiding behind their curtains. So I stood there, fists raw from knocking, heart pounding, staring at a door that used to always open for me. And in that moment, the truth hit me like a punch to the chest. This wasn't my home anymore. It was just a house, and I was on the outside. Just as I was about to jiggle the back door handle one more time, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The vibration startled me. It felt louder than usual, like the whole world had gone quiet, just to emphasize that single sound. I pulled it out, half expecting it to be a friend, asking how the drive home went. Maybe even my mom telling me she was on her way to open the door. But no, it was a text from my mom. My throat went dry instantly. I tapped the screen, my thumb trembling so badly, I almost dropped the phone. And then, there it was. Just one short message. Just a handful of words that completely shattered me. You don't live here anymore. We told you. Once you left for college, you're on your own. Find somewhere else to stay. I read it once, then twice, then 3 times. As if maybe I had misread it. As if the letters would rearrange themselves into something kinder. But they didn't. They just sat there, sharp and cold, stabbing me with every repetition. It felt like someone had punched me straight in the stomach. My knees went weak, and I leaned against the porch railing, just to keep myself from collapsing. Couldn't believe it. I mean, yes, my parents had always hinted at this whole tough love approach. They liked to say things like, once you're out, or we're not raising a child forever. We're raising an adult. But I never thought they actually meant it. I thought those were just words, warnings to push me to be independent, not actual rules they would enforce so brutally. But this was real. Here I was, barely 19, fresh out of my first semester, exhausted, stressed, and honestly just desperate for a few nights of rest in the bed I had slept in my entire life. And instead of a welcome home hug, I got locked doors and a text telling me I was homeless. I wanted to scream at the screen, as if my mom could hear me through it. Are you serious? You're really doing this to me? After everything? After all the years I lived here? After everything I did to make you proud? This is how you treat me? But no words came out, just silence. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, shaking so much I could barely type. What was I supposed to say? Please let me in. Please don't abandon me. I hated how desperate that sounded. I hated how powerless I felt. My mind started racing through all the excuses, all the justifications. Maybe this was some cruel joke. Maybe they thought this would motivate me. Maybe if I just begged, they'd open the door and laugh it off, saying, "See? That's why you need to stand on your own 2 feet." But deep down, I knew this wasn't a joke. This wasn't temporary. They had decided I was out, and the part that hurt the most wasn't even the bags or the locked doors. It was that text, the coldness of it, no emotion, no compassion, just blunt words on a screen, like I was some tenant, being evicted, not their own child. I sat down on the porch step, staring at that message over and over again. My chest felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on me. I thought about how many times I had curled up inside this house when I was sick, how many nights I had cried on that very porch after a bad day, how many mornings I had woken up to the smell of breakfast cooking inside. And now, None of that mattered. The place that had been my sanctuary was now just four walls and a roof that no longer wanted me. I couldn't stop thinking, what did I do to deserve this? Sure, I wasn't perfect. I had argued with them before. I had made mistakes. But didn't every kid? Wasn't college supposed to be stressful enough without worrying about whether your family still had your back? And then another wave of realization hit me. Where was I even supposed to go? I didn't have much money. My part-time job barely covered gas and food during the semester. Hotels were out of the question. My friends were scattered across the country for break. And now the one place that was supposed to be guaranteed was gone. That thought alone made my eyes sting with tears. Not the kind you can hold back, but the kind that burn and spill over no matter how hard you fight them. But I didn't let myself cry. Not yet. Not in front of the neighbors, who were still watching. Not when I felt like I had to keep some shreds of dignity. So I just sat there, phone in my hand, reading that same message over and over. You don't live here anymore. Once you left for college, you're on your own. Find somewhere else to stay. The words echoed in my head like a cruel chant. And the more I read them, the more I realized something I never thought I'd have to admit. I didn't have a home anymore. 1,000 thoughts rushed through my head all at once, crashing over me like waves in a storm. I couldn't hold on to just one. It was anger, sadness, confusion, fear, and betrayal, all tangled together. It was almost too much to process. The anger came first. How could they do this to me? I was their child, their flesh and blood. Parents were supposed to protect, to guide, to love. Even when I messed up, even when I made mistakes, I always thought they'd be there to help me find my way back. Instead, they had locked me out, tossed my things onto the porch, like I was some stranger who had overstayed my welcome. The very people who raised me had now decided I didn't belong. But as quickly as the anger came, the sadness hit harder. It wasn't just about the bags or the locked doors. It was about everything those actions symbolized. Every memory inside that house felt tainted now. The Christmas mornings by the tree, the late night talks at the kitchen table, the times I had curled up on the couch when I was sick, they all replayed in my mind, but instead of comfort, those memories stung. Because now I realized all of it had a condition. That love, that safety. It only lasted as long as I fit into their rules. The moment I stepped outside the lines, it was gone. And betrayal. That was the sharpest of all. Parents are the one bond in life that's supposed to be unshakable. No matter what happens, no matter where you go, you're supposed to be able to come home and know you're safe. But now, staring at those black trash bags stuffed with my life, I realized that bond had been broken. Not bent, not strained, broken. And once something like that shatters, you can never look at it the same way again. I lowered myself onto the porch steps, the wood pressing uncomfortably against me. But I barely noticed. My body felt heavy, like I was carrying all the emotions at once, and I didn't know how to let them out. I just sat there, staring at the trash bags piled around me. Each one looked like a symbol of rejection. Each one screamed, "You don't belong here anymore." Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't bother wiping them away. What was the point? Nobody was coming out to comfort me. Nobody was going to tell me it was okay. I was completely alone. I tried to imagine what my parents were doing inside. Were they watching TV like nothing was wrong? Were they sitting at the dinner table, eating without me? Or were they hiding in the dark, listening to me knock, hearing me cry, and still choosing silence? The thought of that made my chest ache. It was almost surreal. I kept glancing at the front door, half expecting it to open at any moment. Maybe my mum would come out, tears in her own eyes, saying this had all gone too far. Maybe my dad would put his arm around me and tell me they didn't mean it. that I was still their kid no matter what. But the door stayed closed, and that silence spoke louder than any apology ever could. My childhood home, my safe place, suddenly looked like a stranger's house. The bricks, the windows, the porch I had sat on countless times before. It all felt different, cold, foreign, like I didn't have the right to be there anymore. The place that once felt like the center of my world now seemed like nothing more than a house occupied by people I used to know. The more I stared, the more the pain twisted into something else. Emptiness. It's a strange feeling to go from being filled with so much emotion to feeling like nothing at all. I sat there, motionless, my hands limp at my sides, my tears drying into salty streaks on my cheeks. And in that emptiness, one thought rose, above the chaos. If my own parents could treat me this way, who could I really count on? That question echoed in my mind, heavier than any locked door, sharper than any harsh text. Because the truth was, I didn't know the answer. I don't know how long I sat there on those porch steps. It could have been 10 minutes or an entire hour. Time seemed to blur while I stared at the piles of trash bags, each one filled with pieces of my life that had once lived inside that house. At first, all I could feel was the weight of rejection, but then something started to change inside me. It began as a small flicker, a thought buried under all the sadness and anger. I don't have to let this be the end of me. That flicker grew stronger with every second I sat there, because the longer I stayed on that porch crying, the more I realized I was giving them exactly what they wanted. They wanted me broken. They wanted me desperate enough to beg, to apologize, to crawl back, asking for forgiveness, even when I had done nothing wrong. And that's when it hit me. I had two choices. I could fall apart, let their decision crush me, and sit there forever waiting for a door that would never open. Or I could fight back, not against them, necessarily, but against the version of myself that felt powerless. I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve, taking a deep, shaky breath. My chest still hurt, but underneath the pain, determination was rising. I stood up slowly, feeling my legs tremble, but forcing myself to stay upright. For the first time that night, I spoke words out loud. Not for them, but for me. If they don't want me in their house, I whispered to the empty street. Fine, but I'm not going to let them break me. The words felt strange leaving my mouth, like they belonged to someone braver, stronger. But I clung to them, because right then, I needed to believe I could be that person. I looked at the trash bags again. At first, they had felt like symbols of rejection. Now, they looked different. They were my proof. Proof that I had something to my name, even if it was just a few bags of clothes, books, and memories. Proof that I wasn't starting from nothing. With new resolve, I pulled out my phone. My hands were steadier this time. I scrolled through my contacts, debating whether to call a friend, maybe ask for a place to crash. But before I hit dial, I stopped myself. Something inside me insisted, figure this out on your own first. So, instead of making a call, I opened the trunk of my car. The hinges creaked as I lifted it, the cold night air brushing against my face. One by one, I picked up the bags and loaded them in. They were heavier than I expected, maybe because of the weight of what they represented. Each thud of a bag hitting the trunk felt final, like I was packing away the last pieces of my childhood. By the time the last bag was in, I stood there with the trunk shut, my car now holding everything I had left of home. I stared at the house one more time, the dark windows, the locked door. For a moment, I felt the sadness creeping back, that familiar sting in my chest. But instead of collapsing again, I clenched my fists and told myself, this is it. This is where I start over. I slid into the driver's seat, the leather cold against my skin. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, as if bracing myself for the road ahead. For a few seconds, I just sat there, engine off, staring at the house, waiting. Maybe some part of me still hoped the door would fling open and my parents would come running out, telling me they were sorry. But it didn't happen, so I turned the key. The engine roared to life, and in that moment, it felt like more than just a car starting. It felt like me starting again. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught one last glimpse of the house in my rearview mirror. It looked smaller than I remembered, less like a home, and more like just another building on the street. My parents thought they were teaching me a lesson by throwing me out, and maybe they were. But it wasn't the lesson they intended, because instead of learning weakness, I was about to teach myself strength, and that drive away from my childhood home. That was the first step in proving it. That night, after driving, away from the house that no longer felt like mine, I ended up on the doorstep of a close friend. I didn't even have to explain much. One look at my face, one glance at the bags in my car, and they already understood. Without hesitation, they opened the door and said, "Stay here as long as you need." It wasn't glamorous. It was a lumpy couch in a small living room, with a blanket that barely covered me, and the constant hum of the refrigerator nearby. But that night, it felt like the softest bed in the world, not because it was comfortable, but because it represented something I still had: kindness. Even when my own parents shut me out, someone else cared enough to make room for me. That single act of generosity kept me from completely breaking down. But I knew I couldn't rely on their couch forever. I needed a plan. The very next morning, while the sting of betrayal was still raw, I pulled out a notebook and started writing down everything I could do. It wasn't much. I had a part-time job that barely paid above minimum wage, a few shifts, here and there, and whatever scraps of savings I hadn't already spent on books and gas. Still, it was something. I started picking up every shift I could. Early mornings, late nights, weekends. If they asked for help, my hand was the first to go up. Some days I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to work a shift, drag myself to class half asleep, and then clock back in again at night. My body ached constantly, and my grades wobbled under the pressure, but I refused to quit. Every dollar I tucked into my savings jar felt like a brick in the foundation of my future. The couch became my home for a while. I'd come back after long shifts, drop my bag on the floor, and collapse onto it. Some nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, worrying about money, about rent, about whether I was strong enough to actually make it. But in those quiet hours, I also felt something new, something I hadn't felt in my parents' house: freedom. Nobody was standing over me, telling me what to do. Nobody was dangling love over my head like it came with conditions. I was tired, I was broke, but for the first time in my life, I was in control. Eventually, after weeks of scraping and saving, I found a tiny apartment near campus. When I say tiny, I mean it. Barely enough room for a bed, a desk, and a couple of shelves. The walls were thin, the paint was peeling, and the heat didn't always work. But when I signed that lease and picked up the keys, I felt like I had just claimed a palace. Carrying those first boxes inside, those same bags my parents had once dumped on the porch, I felt a surge of pride. They weren't trash anymore. They were mine, part of the life I was building for myself. It wasn't easy living there. Some nights I had to choose between buying groceries or keeping the lights on. I learned to stretch a bag of rice and a few vegetables into meals that lasted days. I sold old clothes online just to cover utilities. And more than once, I fell asleep at my desk, surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee cups, wondering how much longer I could keep going. But here's the thing. Every single struggle pushed me harder. Every time I thought I couldn't do it, I proved myself wrong. Every bill I paid on my own, every meal I cooked, every shift I survived, it was proof that I didn't need my parents' house to survive. I was building something stronger than a roof over my head. I was building independence, slowly. That realization changed me. Instead of crying about the door that had closed, I started looking forward to the doors I could open on my own. Instead of mourning the family who rejected me, I started creating my own kind of family. Friends who showed up, co-workers who supported me, and eventually myself. Because at the end of the day, the most important person who believed in me had to be me. And once I learned that, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was growing. Months passed. My life had settled into a rhythm. Classes, work, bills, late nights of studying in my little apartment. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every time I looked around that tiny space, I reminded myself, I built this. I survived when they thought I couldn't. By the time the semester wrapped up, I wasn't the same person who had once sat crying on the porch steps with trash bags at my feet. I was stronger, tougher, independent, and that's when the unexpected twist came. One afternoon after turning in my last exam, I finally had a moment to breathe. I was sprawled on my bed, exhausted but relieved, when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was a text from my mom. For a second, I didn't even want to open it. Memories of the last message, the one that had slammed the door, shut on me, flooded back. My heart raced. My hands shook. Finally, I tapped it open. Her words hit me like a wave. We didn't expect you to actually move out. We thought you'd beg to come back. Maybe we went too far. I sat there staring at the screen, completely still. Months ago, those words would have crushed me. I would have cried, begged for an explanation, maybe even asked for forgiveness. But now I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt free. For the first time, I realized just how far I had come. My parents' lesson wasn't the one they intended. They thought locking me out would break me, force me to crawl back on my knees. Instead, it lit a fire in me. It pushed me to grow into someone who didn't need their approval to survive. I thought about all the nights I spent on my friend's couch, all the shifts I worked until my feet ached, all the mornings I woke up in my drafty apartment and reminded myself to keep going. Every struggle, every tear, every moment of doubt, it all led to this, freedom from their control. So I typed back the simplest message I could. Don't worry, I figured it out on my own. I stared at the words before, pressing send, making sure they carried exactly what I felt. No bitterness, no need for revenge, just the truth. Then I hit send and set the phone down. For a long moment, I just sat in silence. And then, for the first time in months, I smiled. That message wasn't just a reply to my mom. It was a declaration to myself. I had figured it out on my own. I was standing on my own 2 feet, and nothing they said or did could take that away from me. I didn't know how my mom would react. Maybe she'd be relieved. Maybe she'd feel guilty. Maybe she'd brush it off like it was no big deal. But honestly, for the first time in my life, I didn't care. Their approval wasn't the measure of my worth anymore. What mattered was me, and that realization felt more powerful than anything I'd ever experienced. Looking back, I could finally see it clearly. Their plan to teach me independence was flawed, even cruel, but in a strange way, it worked. just not the way they intended. They wanted me to feel small, to come running back. Instead, I discovered how strong I actually was. It was like being thrown into the deep end without warning. At first, I flailed, desperate not to drown. But little by little, I learned how to swim. And now, standing on the other side of it, I wasn't afraid of sinking anymore. That night, after sending the text, I sat by my window in my little apartment and thought about the journey, the pain, the tears, the loneliness, but also the growth, the resilience, and the pride. My parents had closed one door, but I had found an even bigger one waiting for me. Freedom, independence, strength. And the best part? I wasn't just surviving. I was finally living, on my own terms. When I look back now, I realize that moment on the porch, the one where I stood staring at my belongings stuffed into trash bags, wasn't just a bad memory. It was the turning point of my life. At the time, it felt like everything was falling apart. My heart was broken, my trust shattered, and I truly believed my world had ended. But in reality, that was the day a brand new world began for me. Being locked out of my own home by the people who raised me was painful beyond words. I felt rejected, unwanted, and betrayed. I kept asking myself, wasn't I their child? Didn't they care? Didn't they love me enough to at least let me sleep under the roof I grew up in? Those questions haunted me for a long time. But as the months passed, and as I started building my own life piece by piece, I realized something important. Sometimes the people who push you away are unknowingly pushing you toward your greatest strength. If I had been welcomed back home, that day I probably would have slipped into my old patterns, relying on them for comfort, avoiding responsibility, and never truly learning how capable I really was. It's a hard truth to swallow, but being thrown out wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. I used to think independence came when you reached a certain age, or when someone finally gave you permission. But I've learned that independence is something you claim for yourself. It's earned in the small, quiet battles. Waking up early to work a job you don't love because you need the money. Studying late into the night, even though your body is begging for sleep. And learning how to stretch a single bag of groceries for an entire week. It's in those moments of struggle that you discover who you are and what you're capable of. And here's the surprising part. It doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like fear, like failure, like loneliness. That's why so many people run back to comfort, even when that comfort comes with conditions or control. But if you push through the fear and keep moving forward, you eventually realize that freedom has been growing inside you all along. My parents thought they were teaching me a lesson by locking me out. Maybe they were, but not the one they expected. They thought I'd come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. Instead, I learned how to stand tall on my own 2 feet. Their rejection taught me self-respect. Their silence taught me resilience. Their coldness lit a fire in me that no one can put out now. So to anyone listening who might be going through something similar, maybe your family, friends, or even a partner has shut you out or turned their back on you, let me say this. It hurts. I know. It feels unfair and cruel. But sometimes the hardest chapters of your life are the ones that shape you into the strongest version of yourself. Don't let rejection convince you that you're worthless. Don't let betrayal convince you that you're broken. Those painful moments can become the foundation of something powerful if you let them. The truth is, we don't always get to choose the way our story starts. I didn't choose to come home and find my life in trash bags on the porch, but I did. Choose how the next chapter would be written. I chose to fight, to build, to believe in myself, even when no one else seemed to. And that choice made all the difference. Now, when I look at where I am, I don't feel bitterness anymore. I don't even feel anger. What I feel is gratitude, not for the pain itself, but for the strength it forced me to uncover. Because now I know, no matter what happens, I'll never doubt my ability to survive again. Being thrown out wasn't the end of my story. It was the spark that started everything new. And if it happened to me, maybe it can happen for you too. Sometimes the worst thing you go through ends up being the very thing that sets you free.